So you read genre, but you want to read the classics. More importantly, you want to enjoy the classics. They're on every recommendation list. Every time there is a top 100 books that you need to read, it contains the classics. Maybe you've tried them. Maybe you haven't liked them in the past. Maybe you've never even given them a go. You're not sure how to get from where you are to where you want to be and how you're going to actually enjoy what's going on. You could just dive in. That might work for you. Maybe it already has, and that's absolutely fantastic. But this is probably not the video for you. Let's say you want to be a bit more cautious. You want to expand your taste rather than just jumping from one side to the other. Let's say you read fantasy, high fantasy, sword and shield, sword and sorcery, really anything that gets a bunch of people, often with swords, hacking at the bad guys to save the world. And you want to read Pride and Prejudice. Maybe you've even watched the movie or the TV shows and you're like, yeah, I thought that was fantastic, but the book, I can't with the book. How do we get from Shem Skullcrusher, scourge of the battlefield, smiting his enemies, to Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy dancing together and actually enjoy it, like really genuinely enjoy it? First, let's look at the difference between these books. For a bare bones classic fantasy, it's going to be plot heavy. It's going to be action forward. And there's going to be really high stakes. Either the country, the world, or possibly the universe is going to end if you don't succeed. Often, and I say this with love, your characters aren't going to really stray past the archetypes that they are when the story first sets up. So you have your reluctant hero, the thief with a heart of gold. You have the stranger with a mysterious past. There is a blueprint for this kind of book, and it's going to stick to it quite closely because that's what you want. That's why you're reading a fantasy book. You want the fantasy. That's our start. And on the other end, we have Pride and Prejudice. This, as a classic romance, is going to have probably kind of a complex language. It's going to be light on the plot, and it is going to be largely about internal character changes and perspectives. There are high stakes, but the stakes are about the social and the interpersonal. The world is not going to end, but the character's world might. Books like Pride and Prejudice, they also have a blueprint, but you haven't read them before, so you don't know what that is. Instead of trying to jump across this chasm of Shem Skullcrusher to Mr. Darcy, let's put in a couple of stepping stones. So you could take this on a purely genre basis and say we're starting at fantasy, then go to fantasy with a romance subplot, then a romance fantasy, then romance, then Pride and Prejudice. This could work, but it's super vague. There's just not enough information there to actually help you go from one end to the other. Like, you could go from Legend by David Gemmell, and then, as your fantasy with a romance subplot, Guards by Terry Pratchett. Your romance fantasy, A Course of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. Then we're going to go to a romance, Book Lovers by Emily Henry, and then Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. If you do that progression, I mean, if it works, fair play, but it's probably not going to, because it's not actually bringing you from the original story that you're reading into a context that the new story is. So let's not talk about it purely in terms of genre. Let's talk about it about the content of the book. And now this is a framework. I'm not going to just recommend you 10 books that you have to read and it will get you to Pride and Prejudice. You're going to have to do a bit of work yourself because it's about your taste. If I recommend you books that aren't your taste, it's never going to work. So I'm going to tell you about the kinds of books and the stuff you should be looking for that's going to get you from one step to the next. The first step is finding a fantasy book with strong character development and really strong inter-character relationships. The hero is not just a hero. The villain is not just a villain. Yeah, the world might still be ending, but you really care as much about the relationships dynamics as you do about the end of the world. This doesn't need to be a romance subplot, but we are moving to Pride and Prejudice, which is a classic romance. So I would recommend kind of moving that way, but it's totally up to you. The most important element here is that the character is equally important, or nearly equally important, as the plot. Preferably we're also going to get a little bit more inside the characters' heads rather than just about the action that's going on. Next, we push this a little bit further, and while the world might still be ending, that's only circumstantial. The characters are the forefront of this book. It's all about the people and what they were doing. There can still be magic, there can still be dragons and swords and all that fantastic good stuff. But it's about the characters, it's about the people. When we narrow the scope of the story, it has to be a bit more grounded. Like, it doesn't matter if you're a dragon rider, you are more grounded when it's not about the world ending, but it's about you losing your home. The stories are smaller in scope, but they're still really big stories, and it's going to get you more used to the idea of an internal narrative pushing things along rather than waiting for external plot points to occur. Now we're making a bigger jump, probably the biggest jump, and that is dropping the fantasy. We really want the same things that we had in the last stage, but here it's just a normal world setting. We're getting more used to the character dynamics. We're getting used to the smaller stakes, but them being replaced by the internal stakes and how important that is. There's more internal narrative. There's more character perspective. There's more caring about these people as opposed to necessarily caring about the end of the world. The plot should be smaller. It should be personal. Because what you care about is the people, or what you should be caring about is the people. At this point, I'd actually recommend that you watch some old movies. Either that, or you read books that are based on societal expectations for a society that you don't really know anything about. A big barrier with classics in general is that they're written for a society and culture that you don't understand. Yes, there are lots of elements that are relatable, but it doesn't mean you're going to get all the social cues. So it's going to help either to start learning a bit more about those social cues from old movies, or figuring out how you can dive into this world and figure it out as you go, which is the books about society that you're not a part of. To be honest, if you're coming into this from a fantasy point of view, you probably have a bit of a benefit because you're used to the world building. You're used to coming into something and saying, hey, I don't know everything that's going on. I'm going to figure it out as I go. And you need that for something like Pride and Prejudice. Classics expect you to understand. They're never going to explain the world to you. You need to be able to pick up on those cues just naturally because the authors expected their audience to know. To them, this is just like everyday information. It's not super fancy or special. And you're not going to get the full impact of the book unless you understand that, or you understand at least a level of it. You don't need to understand absolutely everything, but you'll get more if you have a basic concept of what's going on. Okay, so we've gone from our bare bones fantasy. We've moved into things that are more and more character focused. We're getting rid of the fantasy itself. It's all internal characters. It's all perspective. We've brought down the stakes. The character's world can end, but the world is not ending. And they're just as important. We are now at the society phase. We've learned a bit about what's going on. We understand at the very least that we need to learn a bit, and it's not just going to be completely understandable when we start. Great. It's now time to read Pride and Prejudice. Does this mean you'll like it? No. No. You might hate it. Like, honestly, you might hate it. I'd say if you're really struggling to get through something like that, if you're reading it in a physical book, try the audiobook. Especially, there's a really good audiobook of Pride and Prejudice that's by Rosamund Pike, who plays Jane in the Keira Knightley film version. That's really well done. It's really well acted, and the acting will add a layer to it that you might be missing if you're just reading it and you're missing levels of context. But even after all of that, if you've tried absolutely everything and you sit down and you say, Pride and Prejudice, I just don't get it. It's not interesting. I don't care. Fine. That's totally fine. You don't need to like classics. You don't need to like every book. Reading is entirely about taste. That's not your taste. That's okay. That doesn't mean you're better than anyone else, and it doesn't mean you're worse than them either. It just is. But at least now you have a blueprint for thinking about the different kinds of books, how you can get from one stage into another. Because you don't need to be going only to Pride and Prejudice. There's a lot of classics out there, and a lot of classics that are completely different. Like Lord of the Rings is a classic, which is not the same as Pride and Prejudice. Same for The Outsider by Albert Camus. Once again, entirely different. You can use this method of understanding what's behind the books to try and bridge your way to really any book that you want to go to. It might feel at first that you need to understand the target book really, really well to be able to even build this frame, but you can look at it at very high levels. Or you can ask a friend, someone who has actually read it, get them to describe what the book is about. No spoilers, but get them to just give you an understanding. This isn't necessarily a tried and tested method. It's more a condensing of the way that I went from reading a more genre-focused way into reading a lot wider. This took me a lot longer though, and I went in a lot of weird directions. So if you've tried this and it works, let me know. I hope this helped. Let me know in the comments if it did, and I'll see you soon for the next one.